where you all find yourself right now is you've been tasked with planning an event, right? Nobody sets off to plan an event that is not successful, right? Stakes are high. There's often with events, there's lots of money involved. There's emotions, there's hopes and dreams. Sometimes there's sacred cows. Sometimes there's years of history. And you're tasked with this, in some cases, with little to no experience or expertise. You have to plan this successful event. And so a lot of times what we think is, all right, let's get into the logistics and execution. Let's get those name badges, do this branding, do X, Y, and Z. Those things are very, very important. And that was, as I started my career in event planning and as I was working with clients, that was what I was trying to do to solve the problems, right? If we can get better logistics, it's going to work. But as I worked with more organizations, I realized there's two pieces that if you don't have it, your event will not be successful. A lot of the friction, pain, turbulence, the things that you're going to experience as you work through it in the future is those can be solved by having two other things. And so there's two other elements to every successful event. It's organizational alignment and audience obsession. And so we'll talk about what those mean. But organizational alignment is your event has to contribute to where you want your organization to go. It has to contribute to the goals. It has to communicate what you believe, what you're passionate about. You want your event to feel like you, right? That's even some of the reason why we're here in a barbershop. Like this event, I wanted it to feel like me, right? Like this is my neighborhood. I've lived here for 13 years. I love bringing business to local businesses, and there's those connections that you want to have and want to see through the event. So there's organizational alignment. It has to align to what you want to do. And then this idea of audience obsession. Audience obsession is something that I think is probably one of the biggest keys to event planning, to marketing. And it's the thing that I think a lot of people miss is, and I define it as audience obsession is everything is obsessively designed for those you seek to serve. A lot of times people love to talk about themselves, right? That's all of our natural leaning. Organizations, personally, all of those things, we love to talk about ourselves. Just like you said, our clients are our heroes. Our donors are our heroes. Our attendees, our students are the heroes, right? We want to elevate them, and we want everything to be obsessively designed to best fit their needs, what they're looking to do, how they want to change, and the story they want to tell themselves. So what happens a lot of times is if you just have one element, okay, so if you have just the logistics and execution, you have a beautiful empty room, right? So you can, if you have that budget, you can have the perfect centerpieces, the flowers, the linen, the invites looked beautiful, all of those things, but you're missing the people and you're missing the connection to what your organization's trying to do. The other thing that sometimes people have is this idea of audience obsession. How many people have seen the Fire Festival documentary on Netflix? The Fire Festival was this festival that they were planning. It was like the world's biggest music festival in the Bahamas. They had exclusive things. People were dropping $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. They were just amazing at marketing. And they just missed the mark on almost everything. Like they didn't have water for their people. They didn't have beds. They didn't have transportation. They didn't have artists. Like it's everything that could go wrong with an event. Actually, like the guy, had charges issued against him and stuff. I think he's actually planning another event. I think it's like Fire 2 and people are signing up. So I don't know how that works. Again, they're just like amazing at marketing. Like what they actually did was just made an awesome commercial. but the event itself was just a dismal failure. Like people eating like a sandwich with cheese, and they paid for the luxury package of upgraded food, and yeah, it was just it really gets me when I watch it. We don't want events like the Fire Festival. We don't want to just have audience obsession, and we don't want to have just organizational alignment. This is where a lot of corporate groups, a lot of nonprofits find ourselves. It's really, really good for us, but it may not necessarily be good for the people we're trying to serve, and we may not have the logistics to execute. So this is maybe a little far, saying that it's self-absorbed, but it's talking about yourself in many cases to yourself, right? You don't have the right people there. You don't have those things. It's when someone says, we want to raise $1 million. It's like, have you raised 100 yet? Or 1,000 or 10,000, or even some of those times where it's like, hey, we want to have 1,000 people. We throw out these huge numbers, and it's like, oh, awesome. Like your last event, how many people was it? 30? How hard was it to get 30? Oh man, we were pulling teeth. Like that's the way a lot of organizations will say. So yes, it would be awesome for you to have that press release and say, yes, we have 1,000 people coming to this event, but we can't necessarily do that in a vacuum or right away. So what happens often is people have you have two things that you're good. And this is what happens when you have two elements. So if you have organizational alignment, it fits with what your organization wants to do, and you have logistics and execution, I call this the field of dreams. This is that convergence here. The Field of Dreams movie from the 90s. There's a famous line. It takes place in Iowa, and they wanted these old baseball players to come back, and they said, if you build it, they will come. And that's kind of the way a lot of organizations kind of do things, is if you build it, they will come. Like, who wouldn't want to come to, the Hyatt Regency O'Hare and eat some bad chicken and hear about what our organization's doing? We don't want to have the Field of Dreams, right? These are great things to have, but we're missing that audience obsession piece. We're missing that everything obsessively designed for those we seek to serve. Another common thing that happens is people have the logistics and execution. They plan the details, they get the things right, and they have audience obsession, but it's this isolated success, right? So it's great that you have audience obsession. It's great that you have this ability to connect with the right people and execute it in a good way. But if you don't have that connection to the larger organization's goals, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? You're going to miss a big part of it. And it's random acts of marketing. Again, this is better than nothing. But if you really, really want to succeed, if you really want to meet your goals, if you have that organizational alignment, it's going to be much, much more effective. And then the last thing that we find a lot of organizations find themselves in when they're planning events is this idea of organizational alignment and audience obsession. They have it. And this is that great message, bad execution. This is kind of the thing that I think most people fear, but happens the least amount. Like, yes, there's those times where, you'll have some audio feedback, you'll have some issue, you'll have something that doesn't go the way you want it, or you have an outdoor event and it rains. Like, there's things that you can do to solve for a lot of these pieces. But this is what everybody fears. This is what the stakeholders and bosses will kind of focus on. But often this isn't the most important thing. Usually the logistics happen. And there's going to be pieces that are clunky. But what we'll talk about later is really, as it relates to all of these different things, if you were to flip this circle upside down, this is really the foundation that you build your event on. These two things, audience obsession, organizational alignment, that's the foundation of the house. That's the foundation of this thing that you're building. It's a lot of times I think people approach events like, if you were building a house, the first thing you do is pick out the curtains, right? Oh, I'm going to have green curtains. Like, I love how sometimes in the first meeting of events, I've had people be like, our napkins are going to be green. I was like, okay, tell me more about that, because I think this is really important right now. Not where is your event? What are your goals? What are you trying to do? Who's it for? They're like, we're going to have green napkins and they're going to be branded. It's like, okay, love that. Who's it for? Like, what are we doing? It'd be like building your house, but not starting with the foundation, not building that blueprint. If you do this, if you do these two things, your events will be successful. The things that you're doing here in logistics and execution will come together. They're going to come together a lot more easily, and it's going to be a lot more smooth for your attendees. And so we're talking about this idea of the 80-20 rule. Have you ever heard the Pareto principle? They say 80% of your work often only yields 20% of your results, but actually 20% of your work will give you 80% of the results. So you're going to spend 20% of your time up here, organizational alignment and audience obsession. This is where 20% of your time is going to go, but 80% of your impact, your 80% will come from this. These foundational pieces, a lot of organizations miss it, and it's in some cases it's easier to do than some of the event details. You're going to spend 80% of your time working through just these little things that just ultimately destroy you, right? That's the way our event was the other day. We spent so much of our time working on just this like little minutia pieces. And so that's really what I want us to have the opportunity to do, have this understanding and use this framework so that we can have events where we're not hitting the gutter 5 feet away from us. We're actually like pointing in the right direction, then running that direction, not changing our mind, not going backwards, not doing all these different things. It's kind of one of those things, like, as I was working through some of the content, it's like, oh, like this makes sense, right? Like, oh, if you want, I'm constantly wanting to lose weight. It's like, oh, you diet and exercise, right? And it's like, oh, if you do those things, like actually at the end of the day, you're gonna lose weight. The logistics and execution stuff, it's so much more tangible, right? It's a lot easier to complain about the slides being wrong rather than being like, oh, I didn't spend enough time thinking like what I wanted my audience to feel when this event was done, or what I want them to remember about my organization.